For folks who might not, there we go. For folks who might not be able to join us live, again, I'm Christy Dosh. I'm your moderator today for managing the hot seat. And with me, I have the president of College Sports Solutions, Jeff Schemmel, and the newest partner in College Sports Solutions, John Hartwell. And you guys are coming to us live from Tammy's Sports Bar and Grill in Fairhope, Alabama, right?
We are.
Welcome. So glad to have you guys today. And we were all three on a call recently talking about, things we might do like this and what would the topic be. And we decided that talking about managing the hot seat might be a fun one, especially since we are, almost at the midpoint in the season. And just 5 weeks in, we've seen Arkansas just fired their coach, Sam Pittman. Virginia Tech has fired their coach, UCLA, Oklahoma State. I am a Florida Gator grad. I know that our coach is firmly on the hot seat. We'll see when they decide to pull the trigger on that. But we thought this might be an interesting topic for those of you who are in administration or otherwise around college athletics. If you want to know the behind the scenes of how this happens, the timing and the strategy, Jeff and John are both former athletic directors. And so they have been involved in this process on that side and also now on the other side, helping schools find that next coach. So, Jeff, why don't you give everybody just a quick bio on you and your background, and then we'll let John do that as well so folks kind of know who they're listening to today.
Of course. I've been in this business way too long, almost 35 years, 25 of those on campus, and the last 10 or so of those with this consulting company. Spent most of my years at the University of Minnesota, 13 years as deputy AD there, and then short stops at Conference USA and Arizona State, and then finished my administrative career at San Diego State as athletic director there.
John, what about you?
Yeah, thanks, Christy, and thanks for all of our people tuning in today. So I'm about 8 weeks out of the AD's chair. I've spent the last 13 years at three institutions. Initially, Troy from 2012 to 15, Utah State 15 to the end of 22, and left Utah State to go to University of Louisiana Monroe, where I left, like I said, about 2 months ago. Prior to that, I spent 10 years in the SEC at Ole Miss. My first stop was in Atlanta at Georgia State, pre-football days. I was there for 6 years. And my path to getting to athletic administration, a little different road. I was a CPA with Ernst & Young for about 4.5 years. And then on the university administration side at the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina, where I played basketball. But excited about the new chapter and joining partners with Jeff and having you as a vital part of our team and helping people in the search business as well as some consulting opportunities.
Awesome. Thank you guys. So it's football season. So I think we're going to end up talking about football a lot. But I think we don't have to limit ourselves to that. We can talk about basketball and other sports as well, as this obviously happens in every sport. We just happen to be in football season and we've already seen some of these coaches being let go. And so that's the first thing I wanted to ask you about is, typically I would think in an ideal situation, you would wait till the end of the season to let your coach go. What do you think triggers a school to make that move this early in the season and go ahead and say, this isn't going to work out. We're going to let you go. We're going to have an interim for the rest of the season. Like, what drives that timing, do you think?
Well, I'll take a shot at that first. I think we're living in a much different era today than John and I probably grew up with in college athletics, especially with NIL, revenue sharing, the involvement or the needed involvement of boosters, donors, people that can contribute to those things, NIL and rev share, probably create a stronger tie and maybe a little more leverage from those kinds of people. And I think we used to never see someone get fired this early in a season. We just didn't see it. And I think the pressure that comes, especially at those high levels, you mentioned those schools that have already made decisions. I mean, those are Power Four institutions with a lot of pressure from alumni and boosters that say, we want to win and we're very involved. So we need to make a change. And so I think we're living in an era that's much different than probably John and I grew up with. John?
Yeah, and I would add to what Jeff said there. Um, Wins are the ultimate judge of a coach, no question. But I think another important thing, and when you look at the four institutions that have already made a change, what is the overall trajectory of that program? Is it a positive trajectory? Are they trending towards more wins? Is it going the wrong direction? And extenuating circumstances. I mean, I would say when you look at Arkansas making a change, and Sam Pittman has had some relative success. He's had some huge wins or had some huge wins in Fayetteville, but you know, just not enough for what their fan base and their administration felt like they needed. But I think the other extenuating circumstance there for making the in-season change is to give Bobby Petrino an audition at possibly Bobby Petrino 2.0 in Fayetteville, which has a whole interesting set of dynamics in and of itself right there too. So there are varying reasons. The only other reason, and none of these situations involve that, would be egregious behavior on the part of the coach, which would force an athletic director and an institution's hand into doing that. But that did not occur in any of these four.
Curious, being on this side and being sort of on the media side as a journalist, this isn't a topic I write about very often, but the accounts that I read are always about the booster pressure and about the boosters and the fans that want the coach gone. And I graduated from UF Law School. I'm hearing a lot right now about UF's coach, so we are firmly in this right now. But on the other side, what does it look like as an athletic director? Are you getting emails and phone calls from boosters and fans pressuring you to make a decision?
I'll let you go first.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah. Uh, yes, you have folks that are going to give you advice all the time. And by the way, as an athletic director, and I know we have some senior level administrators out there who have not sat in the chair yet. You better have thick skin. That's probably prerequisite number one. And you learn as an athletic director how to prioritize, who is chirping about change and who to listen to and who not to. And ultimately, that decision varies campus by campus. Is it strictly the athletic director's decision? Is it the athletic director in conjunction with whether it's the president, board members, influential donors, and it again varies from campus to campus, but you do have to listen to some of those donors because, quite frankly, a lot of them pay the bills too, and so I'm not saying there's a direct correlation between what your donation level is and how much you listen to, but it certainly factors in there, and uh, but there's got to be autonomy, and a lot of that goes back to the search process, and I know we're going to talk about that in a little while. I'm a firm believer that less is more when you're making a coaching decision. You don't, if you see a situation where whether it's hiring a coach or an athletic director or any other position, if you've got a committee of 15 or 20 people, that is a recipe for disaster. An athletic director, I would say the two greatest things that they're judged on are revenue generation and hiring coaches, and on the flip side of that, smooth as possible transitions when you have to make a change.
And I would add one thought to that. I think presidents and chancellors are much more involved in these kinds of decisions these days than they may have used to be. So I think they get the same kind of pressure from the people they listen to, whether that's, again, donors and boosters to the institution itself, who are very, have strong voices. And believe me, presidents and chancellors are listening to that, and they are reacting to that in ways. And John and I both know this, even with as athletic directors look for new coaches, and this is football season to do that. There's also pressure on those ADs relative to their jobs and how they can sustain and keep their own jobs if they don't hire the right people.
Christy, one thing to add there, when you look at the turnover rate, let's just say athletic directors versus presidents, it used to be there was a much shorter lifespan of an athletic director than there was of presidents. That has flipped some here in the last 10 years or so. And the pressure on presidents oftentimes, and I've dealt with this in my career, and most athletic directors will at some point if you do it long enough. You've been told by a president, hey, go do your job. You're the professional in this area. I trust you. But you never know at what point there's going to be a tipping point where donor pressure on a president says, hey, well, I told you this, but I may need you to do this now. And that happens more often than people realize.
Either of you have been in this situation personally, or if you've maybe just seen it happen with other folks. But I know in some of our consulting work and in some of my work as a journalist that you sometimes get presidents who don't know a lot about big time college sports, who maybe have come from an institution that didn't play at the highest level and they're still learning what this looks like. And then if they're in a situation like this where all of a sudden there's a lot of outside pressure to move on from a coach, how do athletic directors and any other administrators that might be involved, how do they help sort of educate the president or have these conversations with the president who maybe doesn't understand what this pressure is really like?
Well, I'll go first with that because I feel strongly about this. The first and foremost thing is to establish a very good, strong working relationship with your boss. They've got to trust you. They've got to trust your instincts. They've got to trust the decisions you make as the athletic director. If you don't have that, they're going to start listening to other people. At the end of the day, you're in charge as an AD of what happens in your department and who the coaches are. And you've got to have an ability to talk to your boss, your president, your chancellor about what you think. And that involves change sometimes. It does involve change. I mean, when I was at San Diego State, I had 3 football coaches. So, and I had to make a change twice. So, it all starts with that relationship you have. Is there a trust factor? Do they believe in the decisions you're making?
Yeah, and I think just to add to what Jeff's saying, it can't be just crisis communication with the president or the chancellor. It's got to be if you're not as an AD, if you're not on the regular meeting schedule, I would say twice a month with your president, it's probably setting up a bad situation. It's just like a compliance person. If a compliance person doesn't have a relationship with coaches, when the compliance person comes calling, the coach is going to say, oh gosh, what have I done wrong? So you've got to establish those types of relationships and educate presidents. Because I think, again, coming from the financial side of things, it's not just, hey, what do we have to pay a head coach in a buyout if we're going to make a change? It's the entire staff and at the Power 4 level, not only the coordinators have multi-year contracts, but a lot of the regular assistants have multi-year contracts. Football operations, a lot of schools have staffs of 35 to 50 in football. So a total change there, which happens normally, moving cost, everything else. So it's a significant financial investment that you can't just say, hey, this is just about the head coaching change. You've got to consider the entire staff.
We get a lot of folks on these kind of calls who are not yet in the AD chair. They're, a rung or two below that at this point. I don't know what your experience maybe has been like at different schools in terms of who's involved within the athletic department other than the AD in these decisions. But as I'm listening to you talk, I'm thinking if I am an administrator who's trying to make it to one day to that AD chair, I want to sit in on as much of this as I can with my AD and be having the conversations with them and hopefully sit in when they're having the conversations with donors or the president. Do you have any advice for those people who aren't yet in the AD chair about how to sort of gain experience like this before they ascend to that highest level?
Yeah, I think there's the opportunity to get involved, and I would encourage, if you're a senior associate or even a deputy, and maybe right off the bat, your athletic director doesn't have you involved, offer your services. If even uh, early in the process or even before change is made, hey, be willing to go into your AD and say, I'm willing to help do some research, or I know this may be coming. Can I put together a file on some folks? Or are there people you'd like me to do some research on? Things like that to get involved. Now, when it gets down to the final two or three, it's really important. Confidentiality has to be really, really important. That's part of one of the benefits of utilizing a search firm. But the confidentiality, especially in today's world of social media and things getting out there, and people are going to speculate whether you keep it a tight knit circle of who knows who the actual candidates are. But at that point, it's going to get down to a very small number of people who are involved in the last two or three. But yes, the ability to get involved on the front end, and oftentimes, in my experience as an athletic director, I oftentimes took a senior administrator who may have participated in that sport or been on the coaching side or something along there, to be able to offer them experience in the search process, but also to draw on their expertise and their experience in that area, not just themselves, but their immediate circle of trust folks as well.
And I would add, Christy, that I was fortunate enough at when I was not an AD to have a boss who um, I hope I gained their trust, and that they added those kind of duties to me, and I was fortunate enough to be very involved. But I would echo what John says, and that is, a lot of times you got to ask. And in this day and age, having a sport or sports report to you and be that liaison to the AD is very, very beneficial, because you learn so much about your sport and the coach himself or herself.
I want to say before I ask my next question, I'm starting to see questions come in from you all in the audience. Please do that. I'm going to keep an eye on them. I'm going to try to work them in. Some of them I know we're going to talk about as we go. But if you want to go ahead and get those in, we'll either answer them in the course of this discussion, or we'll leave about 10, 15 minutes at the end where you can ask additional questions. So feel free to go ahead and pop those in the Q&A chat there. Okay, you talked about building a relationship with the president for these conversations. What about the conversations and the relationship with the sitting coach? I don't want to keep picking on Florida because I'm a Florida grad, but we're 5 weeks into the season now. All the conversation around the team seems to be around the hot seat, and whether this coach is going to make it through the end of the year or not. When do you start as an AD having conversations with a coach? Like, are you setting up expectations before the season even begins, if perhaps they had a bad season last year? And then do those conversations continue to happen on a week by week basis, or you're trying to be sort of hands off and let them do their job during the season? What's the strategy there?
Well, I'll go first there. I think if you're not laying out the expectations you have for your head coach before the season starts, now that if you're coming off a great year, then it's different than what you're going to say if you just came off a not so good year. So, but laying those expectations out for them and letting them understand what those expectations are, where you think you need to be especially at the end of that next season. I think most good administrators have that kind of communication with their head coach. And so when we get to a time like right now, and if you're 5 weeks into the season and you've only won one game, the coach knows that there's going to be serious look at the rest of the season. And as I said earlier, I think the patience that our whole industry has is less than it used to be.
Let me ask you a quick follow-up on that. I know we're talking about football because we're in football season, and obviously that's one of the sports that gets the most, headlines about the coaching hot seat. But are you having that conversation with every single head coach in every sport before their season starts?
In my case, yes, and I'm going to let John answer that too, but I think so. And as I just said, if your staff has sports reporting to them, you're having that communication, that expectation conversation with that administrator to take to the coach. Um, I think it's important. It used to be my philosophy. My door was always open to every head coach. So I want that coach to hear from me too.
Yeah, on the communication piece, unless you're at a Gonzaga or, Marquette, Wichita State, Creighton, where where they don't play football and men's basketball is the driver. If you're at an FBS institution, football is the engine that drives the train. And as an athletic director, I would say, unless there were some extenuating circumstance, there should be almost daily conversation, contact with the head coach. So anything that needs corrective action or talking about, the trajectory of the program, that should be an ongoing communication. That should not be a surprise. No different than, an annual evaluation for an administrator that works under you. Somebody shouldn't be shocked by a negative, some things that need to be worked on. That needs to be ongoing coaching and communication. And I do think that's really important for going both ways for the trust between an athletic director and a head coach, because right, wrong, or indifferent, you're really joined at the hip with your head football coach. But you need to be able, as part of that relationship building and communication process, be able to have hard, real conversations. And I do think, in terms of expectations, I hate putting a number. I hate saying, hey, you've got to win 7 games this year. You got to win 9 games. You got to win 11 games, because there's so many extenuating factors that play into that. But again, I think the overall trajectory of the program, what is the alumni and fan base? Is there apathy in the program? Are you seeing declining attendance and ticket sales? All of those factor in there, but that communication process has got to be ongoing. And I agree with Jeff. Whether you delegate sport oversight to deputy or associate ads under you, there's got to be communication, especially up front. If you've got a program that's been struggling in terms of success, so that they know what the expectations to continue to keep their job are.
And I'll use a good example, Christy, on that very point. My first administrative job in college athletics was at my alma mater, Kansas State. And we had just lost 29 consecutive football games. And we hired a guy named Bill Snyder. And the first year he was there, he won 1 game. But we could see what was happening. We could see how much better we were. The next year, he only won 3 games. And then it was off to the races. And he started winning. It's the best turnaround in the history of college football, in my opinion, what Bill Snyder did at K-State. So I think you really have to be tuned in on a regular basis, daily basis, with what's happening in your program to see whether that progress is being made, whether you're accomplishing the things you want to accomplish.
That's a great example. I had a similar situation at Utah State. My second year there, Matt Wells went 3-9. This was 2016. Goes 3-9. There was some pressure from a couple of donors, even conversation with my president at the time. Hey, I said, we need to be patient here. There's a kid on campus who came a semester early, graduated high school early. Kid named Jordan Love. He's going to be special. And the next year, Matt Wells wins 11 games, parlays that into the Texas Tech job. So, and part of that again is communication and coaching, and got to know when to go to the mat for a coach, looking at the trajectory of the program. But as as we've talked about already, Jeff talked about, that patience window has shrunk with the transfer portal and NIL because you can remake a roster almost on an annual basis.
That's exactly what I was going to ask you. Almost all the questions we have coming in are about NIL and revenue sharing. So I promised everybody I'm going to start steering it in that direction. But that's one of the things I was going to ask is, are coaches going to have less time to turn it around? Because it used to be the excuse, well, it's not his guys yet. This isn't who he recruited, and he has a different, scheme than the last guy did. And so we have to give him time to find the players that fit his style. Well, now, we saw Deion Sanders came in and let go an enormous portion of the Colorado team his first year there. He basically said, hit the transfer portal because I'm not going to use you. And it was huge news because he was telling all these guys, you better go find somewhere else to play because you're not going to fit in with my style here. Are we going to see more of that, you think, going forward? Because coaches are going to be under pressure to turn it around faster. So are we going to see them utilizing the transfer portal or?
I don't think there's any question that how coaches build successful teams now is much different than it used to be. There used to be you recruit someone out of high school, you develop them, and they give you their best as juniors and seniors. Not anymore. As soon as that takes place, they're in the portal, and there's somebody out there offering somebody a lot of money to go somewhere else. A good example, my son is the deputy athletic director at Tulane right now, and they had a great season last year, and their quarterback went for $2 million or plus $2 million to Duke. And so John Summerall had to redo things. He had to think differently and find a way to build a team through the portal and do it in a way that you're really having to take a different team each year and build something from that. I think for me, the part that's missing a lot of times is chemistry, culture, because the kids never get a chance to experience that culture. The coaches have to create almost instant culture.
Let me ask you, piggyback off that for a second. I was thinking as you were talking, and back to the Deion Sanders example for a second, because when he left Jackson State and went to Colorado, not surprisingly, his sons Shador and Shiloh followed, but also Travis Henry followed. Do you think we'll see more of that, where when a coach, especially if they're getting to move up a level, that they might bring some of their best players with them because those are guys they recruited that they're developing, and now because of the transfer portal, they really can leave and go with them? Do you think we'll see more of that?
And by the way, it's Travis Hunter, not Travis
Oh, yeah,
Henry.
I'm sorry. I live just outside of where Derrick Henry was born and raised, so sorry.
Yeah, I think you're going to continue to see that. It will be interesting to see what the final version of the legislation that sounds like, if you listen to most of the media input on it, sounds like it's becoming closer to a reality. I'll believe it when I see it, and it'll be interesting to see what the final version actually is, that there may be a limit on the number of times you can transfer. But it all goes back to, okay, instead of, and I know we have a handful of folks on here who are from the agency side of things too. It's going to be interesting to see in coaches' contracts, because the argument has been for the last 10 or 15 years, oh, I need at least a 5 or 6 year contract because this is a total rebuild, and we've got to start from scratch, and it's not going to happen in 2 or 3 years. Well, that argument's kind of gone out the door. So are we going to see a pendulum switch in the coaches' contracts? If it's up to Jimmy Sexton, probably not, but we'll see how that plays out in the negotiation between athletic directors, general counsel folks, and agents. But it's something that the expectations ramp up almost instantaneously. And, going to one transfer portal window in January now, the impacts that has, because there's some of these coaching hires that are a domino effect. Hey, if somebody that's a sitting head coach gets hired on the 15th or 20th of December, hey, how quickly can the institution that just lost their head coach fill that? because they've got 12 or 13 days till the transfer portal opens, and then it's not going to open again. There's not another period after spring practice that it opens. So that's going to create a whole nother dynamic. All of that being said, you've got to, as an institution, as an athletic director, be flexible and be nimble. And that goes back to coaching searches too. You can't assemble a surrounding of 12, 15, 20 people to help you make this decision. You've got to almost be able to act in a couple of days' time to be able to deal with some of these constraints that are being put in.
I've got a couple of questions around that. So somebody sent in a really good question, and they're anonymous, so I can't give them a shout out. But they said, from an administrator perspective, what can sport-specific general managers do to help retention conversations and recruiting during times of coaching transition?
Well, almost everyone now is got some sort of general manager. Sometimes they don't call them that, but I think especially in this age of revenue sharing, decisions are made every day about where they're going to put their money. And whether you're doing it at Alabama or whether you're doing it at the University of South Dakota, you're still doing it. The zeros are different at the end, but the same decisions are being made about where you're going to put your resources. And I think most new head coaches, most of the ones who are having success, and I think about Clark Lee at Vanderbilt, how he's done it there. He changed how they did things. They coach year to year. They coach team by team, year by year. And I think everyone that has a good manager that can sit down with a head coach and say, here's what we need. Here's where we should put our money. Here's how much money we should put into this position. Because coaches, those of us been around it, coaches are thinking about what are we going to run on offense and defense a lot of time, especially this time of year. So I think at the end of the day, there's a proliferation of what you're calling general managers, and I think they're very valuable.
And I do think as NIL continues to evolve and the GM position, every P4 school has a GM, and I'd say probably 60% of the group of 5, group of 6 folks have that position now. And the folks who have navigated it the most successful thus far are those that don't slot names in. They have positions, and hey, if we've got $15 million to spend, here's how much we're going to allocate to the linebacker position. Here's what we're going to allocate to offensive linemen. And they're not caught up in individual names. And all of a sudden, if that 15 million moves to 20 million, they just populate further based on the same percentages and go get those people. And that is the value of that GM, to be able to help a head coach and to help the coordinators be able to plug that in while the recruiting process is going on. It's become much more complicated than it has been, and much more like the NFL. And I think that's why you're seeing a lot of these GMs or, similar positions. They are people who have at least had exposure to the NFL model.
Yeah. When I feel like the GM position, that's the person who can give you that continuity. That is the person who can be talking to athletes throughout the season and solidifying those relationships. So if there is a coaching change, even if it's not the school firing the coach, what if the coach just goes and takes another job? How do you retain those athletes? And I did a GM webinar with NACDA a few months ago and had GMs from a number of different schools on there. And that's what they talked about was they from day one of the season, they're having conversations with these athletes and they're watching their academic progress. They're looking for signs that they might enter the transfer portal. They're trying to figure out how to retain them. And you almost want that to be sort of separate from the coaches so that if you do have that coaching change, at least the GM position is consistent and they've built a relationship with the players. And we've even seen, and I'm curious to know what you guys think about this. I had the assistant GM from Stanford on that webinar as one of the panelists, and that made me think and remember, Andrew Luck, who is the GM at Stanford, he on the org chart is above the coach, and that was big news when he got hired. And I think at Berkeley, I think at Cal, they were saying, the boosters were like, wait a second, that's what we should do. The GM should be above the head coach. Think about that. Where do you think the GM should be in the hierarchy?
Boy, that's a good question. I'm of the opinion that it should be underneath the head coach. And otherwise, I mean, understand Andrew Luck may be the exception to the rule. He's obviously got a name and had great success both at college and in the pros. So, and that I think that's the exception to the rule, quite frankly. Most GMs that I'm aware of report to the head coach. There may be a lateral connection to an administrator, whether that's the AD or a deputy. But I think typically the general manager is going to have to report to the head coach because ultimately the head coach is responsible.
Yeah, I concur with what Jeff's saying there, but I do think from the administrative side, especially as the amounts grow in NIL and some of your Olympic sports, and even men's and women's basketball, that the athletic director or one of his or her direct reports has to have a pulse on what the total dollar value is to make sure that the institution is not committing NIL dollars beyond what they've got in the kitty, if you will, to be able to pay that out. Because I do know there are some schools that have gotten in those binds that at the end of the day, they made promises to pay amounts that were beyond what they had available. And obviously that has a trickle down effect, on student athletes and agents and everybody else involved in the situation.
The three of us have not talked about this before, so I haven't really prepped you for it, and I don't know the answer to it either. But are we going to have GMs on the hot seat now too? At what point, how do we evaluate their job success and the role they might play in a team that's not winning or performing up to expectations?
Well, I would say under the scenario I talked about, GMs are on hot seats with their head coaches for sure, because they're recommending and maybe even sometimes making decisions about where that money's going to go. And if that doesn't come to fruition, if that isn't successful for the decisions, especially on the money. So let's say they decide to give a considerable amount of money to a particular player at a particular position, and that doesn't pan out, the head coach is not going to be happy, and he's going to hold that GM accountable, especially relative to the money decisions that are made. So, and I'm going to use Tulane as an example again. I know that my son who works there is in daily contact with that GM about what they're going to do with their money and how they're going to decide where to go, position wise and personnel wise. And I think that puts the GM in a unique position, one that we've never seen in college athletics before, for sure.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, the role of a head coach and coordinators and even position coaches has changed. And, whereas talent evaluator, player development, all of those things have been huge factors in the past, they haven't gone out the window, but you better add something in there, and that's psychologists to be able to manage, just like every NFL or any pro sport coach has to be. You've got to manage folks in that room, in that locker room, who are playing the same position, but they're getting paid different values. And inevitably, you're going to have somebody who's at a lower pay or no pay NIL who is outperforming somebody who's getting $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year. And oh, by the way, has a contract for that NIL payment that you can't just say, oh, you're not playing, Jay, you're not playing as much as John. We're going to take some of your money away. Can't do that because there are contracts. So being able to manage that room, manage the chemistry of your program, and still have everybody fighting for the same goal is no small task in the part of a head coach or their assistants.
So shockingly, as a side note, this would be a whole nother webinar, but I've reviewed a bunch of revenue sharing contracts now. And one of the ones I got a hold of that I shared in this law class I taught earlier this semester, there was a clause in there from a Power Four institution that said they had the complete discretion to adjust the players' NIL money as needed. And it had kind of a list of factors, and playing time was one of them. Even though it's not pay for play, there were actually, factors in there that allowed them to adjust the NIL compensation. Now, I would think that a good agent would get that taken out before a player ever signs it, but there's definitely players who are signing these contracts too without getting them reviewed by agents or attorneys. So there are definitely schools who are trying to leave themselves that wiggle room to adjust NIL compensation. We'll see how that actually plays out when somebody tries to do it. What we just saw actually with this past weekend, we got, now I'm trying to remember which school it was that was going to, cancel a contract because the athlete was redshirting. And now there's this whole question of since it's not supposed to be pay for play, can you cancel a revenue sharing contract with an athlete who ends up redshirting? A topic for another webinar.
Well, and I would like to add a couple things too, because we spend so much time talking about rev share contracts and NIL contracts these days. The two things that we've talked about with our clients is you see it all the time. A football program goes to a bowl game and a student athlete opts out of the bowl game, doesn't play. And we've said to our clients, put it in their NIL deal, put it in their rev share agreement. We're not going to pay you until our season is over, and that includes the bowl game. And if you don't play in the bowl game, you're not going to get paid. And the same, it's a little trickier here, but with the transfer portal, we're not going to pay you until transfer portal window closes to make sure you're still here. And so there's agents are not liking that one at all, but a few people have tried it. And I think if I were sitting in that seat that we used to sit in these days, I'd be thinking about that, trying to do that.
Hey, Christy, I'm thinking back to your example, and I just saw this morning where the College Sports Commission is creating this anonymous tip line where people can call in and report, what they consider egregious behavior. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that's managed, what any repercussions may be, all of those things. Like I said, flexibility is of utmost importance for anybody involved in this industry because it changes every day.
Well, considering there's 4 people who work there and they can't get through the deals that are being submitted, can't wait to see what happens with the tip line. I was telling somebody the other day, I was like, you should check and see if the College Sports Commission is hiring because they're going to need more people. They will be hiring soon if they are not already.
For sure. For sure.
Okay, we've got some more questions in from people, but I want to hit a few more things. And like I said, we'll save time here at the end for some more questions. But let's say, okay, we're in season. As an AD, you sort of know that probably coming later this season or at the end of the season, you're going to need to make that coaching change. How do you start setting the stage for that in the background? You're trying to do it quietly. You don't want a lot of stuff getting out into the news, but you want to try to retain, the athletes. You've got donors you're trying to communicate with and keep happy. What does your communication plan sort of look like on the back end? How do you set yourself up to come out of this as unscathed as possible?
I'll let you go first.
Yeah, there are a bunch of components to that. I'll go back to one of Jeff's points earlier. Obviously, the first person you've really got to inform that what you're doing is the president. I mean, you've got to have the buy-in from the leader of the institution, and what is that inner circle. But again, keeping in mind that every additional person that knows what's going to happen is another possible leak. And, people who have not experienced this before are very naive. You may have a CEO of a high level company who can keep important things to themselves as a CEO, but they get involved in the athletic department. And man, they can't wait to tell somebody because inside knowledge is power. And so you've got to be able to manage that. But you've got to have a plan in place that, hey, once this conversation is had with a head coach who you're going to relieve of their duties. Who's going to take over as the interim? How is the communication process going to go to your student athletes? Because ultimately, the student athlete welfare and interest has to beat everything else. And knowing that if you have a team meeting and you say what's happening in the team meeting, if you don't already have a policy that, hey, for any team meetings, you leave your cell phone in your locker. If you let them have those in their hand, man, you're going to have 120 people, sending to mom or dad or tweeting or something. It's going to be out like wildfire. So all of those details, what are you going to tell, what's the process you're going to give that head coach? Because again, and this is what gets lost in it sometimes, you've got to be as much of a humanitarian and a good person as you can to a head coach, to as gracefully as possible. And I know sometimes that's not possible, to let them make their exit. They don't want to come back and clean out their office while there are people parading all through the thing. And it, again, understanding it does not just impact one person. It impacts that head coach and their family, but the whole line of people working in that sport and their families. So you've got to be as compassionate as you got to be firm, but you got to be compassionate in how you handle it. Because if you don't do it the right way, that could possibly have an immediate impact on you, on who you can hire. Because people will say they don't know what the hell they're doing. You don't want to work there, and that has happened before. That absolutely has happened before. So you've got to have all of those details buttoned up.
And I would add one thought to that, and he talked about the team. It's much different if you're going to fire your head coach after what we've seen already, 3-4 games, to go in and talk to that team. And every AD I've ever known that's made a decision like that has had that conversation with the team. I had it with the team. And it's much different in September to have that conversation with the team than it is in November, because by the time you get to November, it's pretty much it's been decided. Everybody kind of knows what's going to happen. This time, those kids want to know, okay, now what? We got 2/3 of a season to play yet. And how are we going to be successful? What are you going to do to help us be successful? So being able to handle and manage your team and those personalities, those people that have probably many of them believe in that head coach, to say it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. We're going to get you. We're going to be as good as we can be, and you're going to be part of it.
So why make that move earlier in the season? I know, John, you mentioned earlier, I think Arkansas is in a little bit of a unique situation in, like you said, you get a little bit of a trial run with Bobby Petrino 2.0 now, but these other schools that have made this decision, why would you do it so early in the season? It seems like there's more drawbacks than there are advantages.
There are drawbacks, but I think when it's done, that again, the trajectory of the program in the eyes of the athletic director and the university are spiraling downward in a direction where they want to salvage what they can. They feel like the current leadership has lost the locker room, and they feel like a change, and obviously have an idea of who on an interim basis. I mean, here's a perfect example: Virginia Tech gets blown out by Old Dominion. That was ultimately what caused them. The culmination of what caused the change. But they turn around and go win, this past weekend against NC State. So the ability to salvage what you can in a season or turn it around is an opportunity too. And I also think that sometimes when you have that downward spiral, and I don't know this for sure, but I've been around some situations that this has happened. Not only are you not winning games, you have off the field problems. You lose the discipline of your team, and a concern that this is going to result in situations and circumstances that are much worse than losing games. So you feel like that change is needed there. It's not a decision that's taken lightly. And back to what Jeff said, when you as an athletic director, because I had to do this at Utah State with Gary Anderson, when you have a situation where you have to stand in front of a team and say a change is being made, you're dealing with 18 to 22, 23-year-olds. There were two or three guys who got up and, pitched I'll say this in as kind of way as I can, pitched a fit right there in the practice facility and said, "What the hell are you doing? You don't know what you're doing, blah, blah, blah. We'll keep it a family program." And I won't say what was really said. Again, you got to have some thick skin sometimes, because it's not going to be a fun situation by any means, nor do you get taught, is there, an AD 101 book that says, here's how you handle a difficult situation when you've got to make a coaching change.
What about in terms of timing? Is there an advantage to making the move earlier in the season in terms of your ability to start either researching or having conversations with people you think might be the right guy for, the job? Or it seems like in December, all of a sudden, there's this like crunch because you've got multiple teams who are all looking for somebody. You've got kind of heavy competition. From your perspective, either as an AD or now, as a consultant helping with these coaching searches, is there a time that is more advantageous, or is there a better strategy in terms of putting yourself in a position to get the best available person out there?
It,
Oh, go ahead. Oh, I would say absolutely. I mean, that's part of what these guys are thinking these days. I mean, you do get a head start. And I think especially those that use people like us to help them. Many of those are public institutions that if they're asked in a FOIA request, who have they talked to, they have to tell. If they hire people like us, we don't have to answer to those. And so we can do a lot of legwork in that October and early November that others that haven't made that decision yet aren't doing. And I think it does give a little bit of a head start, and especially at the level that the firings have taken place already, um, everybody's watching. So if there are coaches out there that have interest in those jobs, even if they're working their tails off somewhere else right now, they're going to let their agent know, to let someone know that they have interest, and you can get a head start that way too.
and just to add there, again, it's not just about the head coach, but if you've got the ability to gauge, if you're an institution and you've got the ability to gauge someone's interest through a search firm, through agents, you can, through the process of elimination, save time and effort and energy by not going on these wild goose chases of somebody who's not interested in your job anyway. And timing really becomes key. Oftentimes, these are sitting head coaches at other institutions. And yes, they may have to wait till after their regular season is over, and maybe even a bowl game if it's an early bowl game. But the timing of making that hire and knowing that new head coach has their coordinators, most of their position coaches, their GM, some other key positions ready to go gives you an advantage when you get to that transfer portal date or when you get to that signing date, because not only does the head coach have potential players, transfers associated with them, but so does that staff. And that timing is really key. And by being able to be organized earlier in the process, you get a jump start on a coaching change that may be done at the end of the regular season, or a coaching change that's as a result of a coach being hired away to another job.
Somebody asked a question I'll throw in here. Brian said, what's driving the decisions or pressure in this new landscape? Is it the money? Is it winning? Is it lack of revenue? I know, John, you've said a couple of times, it sounds like a lot of this is about trajectory. But, do you think the, decision-making process is any different now, whether that's because of NIL or revenue sharing or the transfer portal?
Yeah, I think revenue plays a part in it, the NIL component and its adaptability. I mean, not everybody is going to have what Texas Tech has an NIL for football, but you've got to be able to play the game both upward and downward in terms of finding people who can help your institution win games. You know, what is the threshold? You're, as Christy has talked about, her alma mater, the Florida Gators, potentially when they make a coaching change, there's an expectation at Florida. If you win 7, 8, 9 games a year, you're not going to last at Florida because that's not what the expectation level is. But if you're at, Kentucky, maybe you can win 7, 8, 9 games, go to a bowl game every year, and they're happy with that. I mean, and I just use those as examples, but you've got to know what the expectation is at your institution. And if your institution only has $3 million in NIL money, you probably shouldn't be in the recruiting battle against transfers or JUCO kids or high school kids who are being recruited by somebody who has much larger coffers. You're not going to win those battles. So it's got to be an understanding from the institution, from the athletic director, from the coaching staff, and somewhat an education process for your donors too. I know Hunter Yurachek at Arkansas has taken a lot of heat from speaking the truth about, hey, we just don't have the money here that Georgia has or Alabama has or, other places have. Was that taken in the right context by a lot of people who said, hey, he just said, there's no way we can win an SEC championship? Probably could have been phrased a little differently, but I do think he had a really good point. Hey, this is pay for play. And you look at Texas Tech and they've gone out and look at the results. There is even more now than ever before. There's always been a correlation, but there is a great correlation between investment in and success output. And it's not just about facilities or coaching salaries. NIL is now a significant part of that.
As our final question, I'm going to kind of mush together a few questions we got about revenue sharing, and I think this kind of gets to the heart of what everybody's asking. When you are interviewing new hires now going forward, how transparent is a school going to be expected to be or willing to be when it comes to how much they've been spending on revenue sharing and NIL?
It's the first question that any good coach is going to ask. I mean, they're going to say, what do I have to work with? And you've got to understand, and John said it very well. It's different from school to school. Yeah, maybe Kentucky in football is one way, but I know in Kentucky basketball, it's much different, much different. So I think understanding the coach is going to ask the question, what do I have to work with, especially from a revenue perspective? What money do I have to spend on players, at what positions? And if they don't ask that question, I wouldn't hire them, because that's, in this day and age, the most important piece of the puzzle. What do I have to work with? And a lot of decisions are made these days by institutions about saying, what's going to be our niche? What do we want to be good at? Maybe it's not football. Maybe we want to be really good in baseball. Maybe we want to be really good in volleyball. And they're going to throw those resources at those sports and try to be nationally prominent, especially at the Power Four level, and in sometimes even the Group of Five level, so Group of Six level.
Do you guys think, though, about coaches that are now asking for guarantees in their contracts about the amount of revenue sharing and NIL money they're going to have access to? Like, I think we've seen a handful of coaches now who've gotten clauses in their contracts guaranteeing them a certain amount of money to work with. Do you think that that's going to become commonplace across the board? And how should schools handle that, you think?
I do, and you're already seeing it in some term sheets, which is the precursor to a contract for coaches. You're seeing that because that is a significant component of their ability to have success, especially if you're in the SEC or any of the Power Four leagues. You've got to be able to know that those resources are available, and that goes back to what Jeff was at first answering on the question. Yeah, that's going to be a first question for a coach, and you've got to have that information ready, just like you do. What's the assistant coaches pool? What's the strength and conditioning? What's the relocation package look like? All of that's got to be there, and it's got to be truthful, because you want to talk about a way to set off a bad relationship. Hire somebody, they say, I do, and then, oh, well, we said it was going to be 15 million you were going to have, but the institution's having some financial problems. It's only going to be 5 million. Well, they're handcuffed right off the bat there. And they're also going to say, and why did I come here? And was this truthful and what was going on? And, oh, by the way, you're probably going to have an agent that's going to say, hey, you've misrepresented what the terms of this deal were. We don't necessarily want to sign a contract.
And as you said, Christy, most contracts now, especially in football and probably men's and women's basketball and some volleyball now, it's all about that money, whatever that commitment is on the money is going to be in that contract.
We've got lots of other questions, but a lot of them weren't really about the coaching hot seat. So I took a picture, guys, of all the questions you sent in on NIL and revenue sharing weren't exactly on the coaching topic. And I'll get with Jeff and John after this so we can set up another time to talk about some of these other things. People had great questions about how NIL and revenue sharing are impacting apparel contracts and licensing and sponsorship. So there's great stuff here, guys. I took a screenshot of it so that we'll have it so that we can plan for our next one of these. But just want to thank everybody who came live and the great questions that you guys sent in. And thank you, Jeff and John, for spending some time chatting with us about this. It was recorded, so we'll send it around to everybody that was registered in case you only caught part of it and you want to go back and listen to the whole thing. But appreciate those of you who were able to be here live.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.